past couple of centuries, we've seen the growth of an online world, a virtual world growing up. They take massive importance in people's lives. What we all though lack to do in this virtual world, where people spend more and more time and engage in lots of activities that have value to them, is that there's no current regulation and there's no current accountability for what you do within these spheres. There are practical problems with this though. We see in gaming, for example, that women are highly sexualized and abused and verbally assaulted when they engage and play, even if they're good players. They choose to take on nicknames that and hide their identity because they know that the consequences they face from the online community is so severe once they engage in it. We see things like people posting in forums and just being massively abusing and bullying towards others. And we think this is a problem and it has to be stopped because currently there's no gatekeeping in the online sphere, and that's what we want to do. So practically what we think that has to be added to the virtual sphere is a sense of accountability. We want people in every post that they do and every gaming activity to have their real name out there. We'll also connect their real name, where they live, with their IP number. So if there's sort of an offense committed, but posts that are made would have to carry your real name so people could identify you or reasonably find out who you are. We do that like Tor or VPNs or like proxy servers that people would use. For the sake of the debate, we'd assume that it's actually possible to do so. We're happy to ban them and assume that they're not going to be. Why is this need? They are engaging in a virtual sphere. It changes the nature of behavior of many people. And they take on that might not otherwise exist to the same extent. Further, criminal behavior is facilitated because there's no accountability, nobody actually can police or serve it. What are we talking about? Things like the Silk Road, the dark web, where you can get an assassin and find one within the next 20, 30 minutes who'd come to your door, not to your door, probably somebody else's door. You're going to supply drugs, you're going to do lots of things that normally would be hardly accessible for you to engage in. The fact is that you're behind the screen once you could access these criminal activities, and then you don't have any accountability even if somebody would see it because you posted anonymous, which is people do that buying weed for it, and you don't face any consequences to show who you are. Secondly, we believe that things like online bullying that people massively engage in, that they just find and create a mob. Many times you don't understand the fact that it's creating a mob. You just comment massively bad on something, somebody else comments on it, there's a group mentality that comes out of it. But the fact is though that you're more likely, once you sit behind the screen, to say really offensive things about other people or other groups. Particularly women have been harmed in the online sphere, or in discussion forums. If you read the comment section of The Guardian, all is about women, I'd fuck her, she's a whore, and just generally horrible comments. And there's no consequences for doing that. Do we see the reaction from another person once they do it too? Behind us, one, I'm not going to be punished for this. Nobody knows who I am. Second, you don't suffer the emotional consequences of seeing what this does to another person, which means that you probably think it's just a fun comment you threw out there and it's nothing more about it. You're just saying something that you maybe shouldn't say, something that you don't necessarily agree with, and you don't have any consequences from it. And that makes you be more likely to do it in the online sphere or engage in behavior that you don't do. But I also do think that the online sphere does, it creates this online persona. So you don't necessarily generally horrible person to be doing these things, but you dissociate yourself from real life personality. That might make you more likely to take your own behavior, because you'd say, this is my virtual sphere, and this is me as a real life person. But second practical things that would do is like second life to assault women, like grand theft auto, you steal cars, engage in criminal behavior. You will not necessarily be a bad person for engaging in this, but the fact that it is an online persona makes you more likely. What's the problem with this? Real life consequences. That is the issue. And the fact of like cyberbullying, the fact that it's done from one screen to another, the person who receives the it's not enough for them to just step away from their screen and leave it in that virtual sphere. It would still affect them and how they feel about themselves and how they do perceive themselves once that's left. We've seen problems with this with group bullying, where kids have committed suicide, which is extremely unfortunate, and we do think those harms are practical. Also in terms of criminal activity, the ones that you do have from a virtual sphere does translate. But the drug selling, arms selling, etc., there are consequences of it. First of that, I'll take closely.
So many websites have developed sophisticated moderating systems to stop the kind of trolling that you're talking about. Why isn't that sufficient? Why do you need the necessity of?
So the problem with moderating is that they come in once an offence has already been committed. It's reactive to what's being put out there to a person. Somebody that tells you something really horrendous about your personality, what you've done. Fair enough, the extent of it might not be as massive if you have somebody taking away after a while, but there's still an harm in the comparative not letting it out there and putting a gatekeeping mechanism. That's generally a horrible idea. What we do say, though, is that online behavior does create a norm within you, within time. It will affect other parts of life and how you deal in the real life sphere. An example of gaming, if I'm constantly playing games, what one of the tasks are, you don't really have women of any role, you can constantly assault them as a second life, which is a factor. Or for a long extended period of time. Not necessarily that they go out and just start stealing cars out of the view or think that it's really okay to be engaging in criminal behavior themselves, but they probably be more willing to accept it if they see somebody else being subjected to that crime or somebody else discussing, while I was thinking about doing that. If it is such a great part of your personality and your virtual identity of doing this, I believe it's more likely to translate into your real life behavior and be that sort of behavior who you would not necessarily have engaged with and encouraged unless you've been in this online sphere without wanting to be doing this. What we do say, though, is to some degree, yes, internet should be a safe space, but this is the best way of creating it, by taking out people that actively wanting to create harm and making sure that there's not a reactive response, but a proactive response, and shutting them. So we're very happy to post.
Fine speech and invite the people.
Mr. Speaker, the internet can be a bloody ugly place. It can have some of the most atrocious thoughts put out there, but we believe that there are goods also in anonymity felt there. We believe there's actually an innate good in allowing this, in preventing this repressive measure from blocking those thoughts being put out there, from blocking sort of freedom of speech. So there's 3 points I want to bring to you today. First, I want to discuss how this measure in itself is incredibly repressive, and that actually has some genuine harms throughout the world. Secondly, we want to talk about identity and self-actualization that can happen through the internet and why anonymity is crucial to that. And thirdly, we want to talk about the discussion and outlet value of having anonymity in the internet. Before I go on to that, I want to go on to some rebuttal about this. So we've got 6 points of rebuttal. Number 1, the first speaker said some interesting thing about how at the moment women have to hide their identity online because they're scared of the risk to be put towards them. Well, this is also exactly the point. It's actually super dangerous. Someone has to still be used for the address of online. And opposition. We believe that we believe that huge anyway, and then we believe there's huge damage anyway. If they actually do have the views and then track them down without actually give their name out in the first place. In cycling, a lot of cases they know actually using their whole names. The issue is that we're not holding them accountable. Not they can use anonymity. We believe there are different systems you can use, like moderating systems that are and sixthly, it's a huge idea about how it's normatively shift our behavior, the whole first in the world itself. motto is like is it because secondly, like pick up artistry. Most like the famous and that's kind of like used against it. But like the fact of pick up artistry is like we have this that. Anyway, on to the point. It was like super impressive, like preventing people from actually using the internet. An obvious example. China and Russia. These countries have like entrenched like repressive anti-homophobia, anti-racism. And like the issue is because like a lot of people in these countries have it. So firstly, like it is good because for someone who's like a gay activist in China, they can use their false name online. If they had to actually express their names, get like neighbours who have like super homophobic views, who could we believe like government capacity to like then shut down. But like so like the Russian government and like can like find out who's like posting these views and like send them off to jail. Maybe later. So like secondly, that we actually think like this so like two ways it does it. So like the activists in China can like the consequences like the one-child policy in China. It can like explain like what actually the policy is doing. Inside China, this is great because it allows people in China to also see that other people are seeing what they're viewing and more collective action. Like they communicate. Secondly, it allows people outside of China, so like in America, to see like what's actually happening on the ground, and then that can sensitize them to take action against China and put like political pressure on it. Two, this like leads to the fact that there's like more collective action. This isn't just in like third world countries like China and Russia. This is also in like places like out of the closet like completely, and this is like then allows them to like communicate with each other. So we like and so like and we also think like on a side there's also a danger of police using information people like posting stuff that like critiquing like political views or the police. Like the CIA has been known to take the history of people who do that online and then use it against the Queensland police in Australia have been known to do that as well. And so we believe this like super chats sound like a really important means of like expression. Second point, before I do that, I'll take a point from both of you.
Right, so when it comes to China and Russia, don't you believe in the vast majority of cases, if not all of them, that you already in the government able to track down these individuals and an awful lot of resources to do that? I mean, that's probably not that relevant to the debate.
So we don't totally agree with that because we actually believe that like there's different ways they can use proxies to get around that. And even if that is the case, you kind of undermine your own case there because they're surely going behind these horrible views anyway. And you need to make anonymity like a thing. So like on to my second point, which is like identity and self-actualization. Like the internet is a huge means of escaping it. It's a huge means of allowing you to express stuff about yourself that are not like socially acceptable. Like you may be kinky, you may like to have like cyber sex in Second Life, you may be into like furries, and like that in itself should be okay. But like you're not gonna all go tell your neighbor about that. Like express parts of yourself, and it's like a confident. And the Victorian age was just like super repressed. Like you just didn't talk about it. You weren't allowed that. And the benefits of autonomy to like the person, like even because they are not. There's like a huge part of their self they're not actually able to actualize because they can't like it's not acceptable to society. Are they like a valid means of expression? Okay, so on to my third point, which is like discussion. Like these are some ugly views each other have. Like look at the YouTube comment section. Like is it nuts? But it also like it gives justification firstly to like discussion. Like it gives people like there's the comment section. It gives them like more evidence they can use against that. People like they're not too sure what to make of feminism, and they go on like a activists, and they can use that to actually like differentiate their own views and see like from me. And we believe that's good in itself as well. And then the internet's actually a great way to like unleash like inner repression in people. Like it's actually like a great outlet. They can potentially like mitigate other harms. And then like it can divert like dangerous like to like express it online instead. So that harm in like society can happen because of that. So on those 3 points, that we believe it's repressive, that allows self-actualization, and there are genuine benefits in like having discussion in society. We believe this is not the best method to like take away damages that the internet can cause. There's many methods out there, and we beg to oppose the motion.
I'd like to thank our speaker for that fine speech and invite the Deputy Prime Minister to take the floor.
it is obviously true that there are a handful of people who do use their real names and real identities when it comes to things like cyberbullying, the kinds of activities Amelia talked about. That is still a minority of cases for the reason she brought up. One, that you're worried about actually being accountable for these actions, and as a result, people don't get involved. Note there was no response to the previous speaker that's on the most damaging behavior online. The existence of child pornography with things like Lolita Central. The existence of drug networks like Silk Road. And these are things which we can at least crack down on. I think the opposition at some point needs to respond to that. There's several points of response before I talk about the internet as a safe space. One, the claim about addresses, that it's damaging if you know someone's name and address because you can actually threaten them with violence. One, I think it's quite unlikely that in most circumstances you would do that. Actually, most people have an aversion to actually harming another individual directly. It's often about a lack of proximity with the people you are talking about, particularly random people you're talking about, and it becomes a very remote chance because you just generally are too far away from them. Second, it's part of human nature to often have these very, very crazy views. That may be the case, but I don't know why that is a synonym for being good. We are more than happy to remove that if we can and make sure people don't express that. I'll talk more about that in a moment. Thirdly, she says in cyberbullying, sometimes you ultimately identify yourself. Even in the circumstances that is true, there is less of a reaction from you when you end up bullying someone. You can see them breaking down in tears. You can see the consequences to them. And for most people, admittedly not all, that kind of empathetic reaction means that you back away more early than you otherwise would. We think even on that side, it's a win for our side. Fourthly, she talks about moderation and moderated boards and says that can overcome it. Amelia points out her first response to that, which is that is normally reactive. That you first have to have the comment be made, someone can read it, then you have to tell the moderator before it can be removed. The best case they give you is, well, maybe you can have technology which checks the keywords. I don't know what kind of keywords these would be. If, for instance, you're a board about gay people, what are you going to be screaming out? Things like, probably not, because that probably leads to lots of good discourse as well. So I don't think that's necessarily a very strong claim for their side. Then they tell you is what happens in places like China and Russia, where you want to be an activist online. By and large, I don't think this is part of the debate. Note, for instance, the Chinese already monitor what their people do online, already have that on their IP addresses. Most repressive states already do this, so I don't think that's that relevant to the debate. The better case of this, when we talk about like free speech, maybe more the Western world, and why it would be beneficial for you to be able to say views which you otherwise wouldn't overall. One, that has to be weighed out against the kind of behaviors that we talked about, which I'll talk about in a moment. But secondly, that kind of free speech isn't actually good because it's spurring on public discourse. One, it's often delegitimized when people say this was just some random troll. They didn't put their name to it. How do we even know if they're real? They probably don't have experiences. They may well have made them up. Free speech on the internet, when you have your name attached to it, can be beneficial, but when you don't, it's really, really easy to delegitimize. Then she says it's good that you have this kind of information available because you know sexism exists in society. One, I am happy to reduce the amount of sexism in society if that leads us to not knowing so much sexism exists. I think that is an okay win on our side. But secondly, in terms of the kinds of discourses which occur, we think that sexism doesn't actually always play out in the real world. Even if that wasn't the case, that's the kind of thing that those individuals who don't want to push political change as a result of this can say. I think they're going to be really hard-pressed to show any kind of case where this kind of online message boards lead to these changes. Finally, they kind of can make an argument about sublimation, which is you will engage with behavior online, as a result, you're less likely to do so in your real life. Maybe, like in a very small portion of cases, that may be plausible. In far more cases, what Amelia talked about is likely that because individuals are able to disassociate their lives online from the lives which they have in everyday life, they're far more likely to engage in this kind of uncivilized behavior. Exactly as open opposition tell you. Why is that harmful? Because they don't necessarily realize that what they do online has practical consequences in the real world. We gave you several of them. One, that you often post things which are harmful to people when they read it. Words can have meaning, and words can be incredibly harmful to people. Both sides of the house agree on that. And that's far more likely when people say, when people don't have the barrier of saying, this is me, and I'm not a sexist, I'm not a racist, I'm not someone who would ever make jokes about sexual assault, but this internet character of me isn't me. And that's where you end up with many of these abuses before. Secondly, that you often do end up with a shift, in behavior. Now, what I want to point out is they're probably right. You probably don't get people immediately becoming awful individuals and stealing cars. That was never our claim. It's just far more likely, for instance, you'll end up accepting things like sexist discourse in society. When you keep writing it again and again, that might become more and more the joke you tell at home with your friends. When you hear it, you're far more less likely to find it to be wrong. Admittedly, that isn't entirely stopped by our side of the house, but we think at least mitigate that, and that's a benefit for our side. Let's talk about the internet as a safe space, which might be the strongest claims they're going to make, which is beneficial where gay people or women are able to talk about things which they otherwise couldn't in everyday society because of the barriers which exist. A couple of reasons why we don't even think that is helped as a result of the internet anonymity. Firstly, because even when you try and treat the internet as a safe space, note for the vast majority of people, their identities can be found out. It is, of course, possible when you perceive anonymity, but it doesn't exist as kinds of metrics which people are really, really careful and really want to find out this information can use, they can. So it seems to be a perceived safe space when it isn't. More importantly, though, it's when you go on those message boards, it's often exactly the kinds of spaces which you think are safe, which aren't. Why? Because individuals who want to demonize your identity go on those boards as well. They troll it. So look, for instance, suicide forums. One thing which happens a lot is people actually go on those forums to encourage people to commit acts of suicide. Very difficult to moderate. We've got presence conflict when you can the internet as a safe space. Go ahead.
So is it impossible to moderate comments if, for instance, what you do is have someone who reads the comments before they're allowed on the forum and then likes them if they're saying, let's, like,
I mean, look, so in a small group of cases that is possible. Given the amount of comments you normally end up with, it really doesn't happen and probably won't happen in most circumstances. So we don't think that's necessarily very beneficial. At very best, then, you have like 1 or 2 forums with huge resources which can do that. Nonetheless, we don't think that's very likely. Maybe they could talk about things like WikiLeaks or other kinds of mechanisms where you need to get information out there. But even in those circumstances, we think accountability is very important. It's often a sincerity test. What do I mean by that? If you're going to release material which is considered to be vital or sensitive to national security, we think there should at least be some kind of check on you that you aren't doing in a haphazard way. What kind of check would that be? That you're willing to internalize some of the consequences of that. We think that is beneficial. Secondly, as I pointed out before, and it applies in this circumstance as well, far easier to delegitimize information which comes out from an anonymous source than one which doesn't come out in this way at all. So at the end of this debate, what have we told you? Firstly, some of the worst behavior occurs online because you don't have the kind of accountability mechanisms in place. This is not trivial to the debate, and they do need to respond to it when they have things like the selling of drugs, like the existence of child pornography, like cyberbullying. But even in the majority of circumstances, anthropology, the way people respond to acts on the internet, they do things which they otherwise wouldn't do, which have real-world consequences. It's not a safe space. It doesn't help free speech. It doesn't lead to any real impact in places like Russia and China. We're very happy to propose.
I'd like to thank the speakers for that fine speech and invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition to take floor.
Madam Chair, if what they wanted to do from opening government was stop people encouraging people to kill themselves on suicide forums, that was an easy fix. If what they wanted to do was try and stop the sort of deeply ingrained problems that people had, the views that they held, and the way they put those views out in public, what they needed to recognize is that those views did not come from the internet. They were external. What the internet did was reveal those to us. They showed us what people think and made that discussion incredibly vibrant. What we think at Opening Opposition is that there is incredible value to those discussions happening and being comprehensively won by people who are not the bigots in lots of circumstances. That's what I'm going to bring you from Deputy. Some rebuttals first. The first thing is sort of on the model. So it would be genuinely terrifying by assumption if you were, say, a woman who thought the internet was a scary place where lots of sexist people existed and were likely to have violent tendencies towards you, for you to have to give your address and sort of things to people. They said, oh, it might not, like someone might not be proximal to you, right? First of all, it doesn't matter what the factual reality of the people who will see your information are, it's just the way you perceive that. If you think it is not a safe space, it doesn't matter if the reality is the only person who might be violent towards you lives half the world away, because you still have to give them that information. Secondly, it only takes one, right? Genuinely, it only takes a very small number of people who are intensely angry and aggressive because of things that you say, defending your identity on the internet, to come after you for huge harms to accrue. That was something they never even wanted to contemplate and simply just sort of tried to wave it away through various like sort of hand-waving gestures. Secondly, illegal behavior. They said, it's really important we have to deal with the fact that child porn and like drugs are a thing on the internet, right? In a world where it is trivially easy for them to sort of block every single sort of proxy server or whatever existing and catch literally every single person who might try and sort of circumvent these sort of things, I do not think it is unreasonable at Opening Opposition to say, probably the government with this magic technology can capture like one child pornography website that they could name and like find all the people on the Silk Road, right? In that circumstance, we think that it's fairly easy to fix that problem. The core of this debate was. Thirdly, on abuse online, right? First of all, we would point out that lots of people do comment with their actual names, right? I know there's been looking things like the Daily Mail or news.com.au, like things that I occasionally read, right? Lots of people are happy to put their names to sort of genuinely dire comments because they're genuinely dire people, right? The problem is that this sexism and bad behavior is so entrenched within society that it's not clear they stop this sort of thing being the prevailing view that we see on these forums. What the question is whether or not people will be confident enough to put countervailing views if they have to put their name with it, knowing full well that everyone on that forum genuinely hates them and does not like congruence with their views. Secondly, they said, like we pointed out, right, the Daily Mail moderates comments beforehand. They said, oh, only big forums could possibly do this, right? I would be genuinely amazed, right? Amazed if there was a suicide forum that did not moderate comments beforehand on like incredibly sensitive threads and places where there was a high chance that people would do these sorts of things, right? I think it is a particularly easy thing for people to do because it only takes one moderator to read the amount of like low volume stuff on a particularly small forum, so it's not going to be intensely trolled, so it's not a particular problem for us on this side of the house, and it's something they needed to deal with, right? Fourthly, on online persona, it was slightly odd and probably misdirected when they said Grand Theft Auto. See, the problem is you shoot lots of prostitutes and stuff and you steal cars, and that sort of like subtly like, you know, disconnects your psychic reality, and you might take some of those things into the real world. Like even if you put your real identity in Grand Theft Auto, the premise of steal cars and shoot people to death, right? There was structurally no way to play the game, even if you had to put your name to it, that prevented you from doing all of these sorts of awful things. But in like, and it's not clear what they were trying to achieve by having people put their name to it, right? Probably they just prevented certain groups of people from being able to play that game because that was no longer something they could be seen to be identified with. Like it's a trivial benefit for outside the house that some people are able to like shoot up cars, but it's still a benefit nonetheless. Fifthly, on cyberbullying, right? It was a bizarre characterization for them to say the problem was that people are disconnected from the people they cyberbully on the internet, right? The most harmful cyberbullying, the stuff you hear about people committing suicide, comes on a very personal level, right? People who know other people in schools who aggressively bully them on a day-to-day basis over a very long period of time and have a deep personal connection with them because that's what they're getting the validation from, right? Is the personal knowing of them and their trauma. So it wasn't clear that that sort of model fixes it, right? Because this cyberbullying would still happen through the mediums of things like Facebook and all these sorts of things, right? What changed, though, was that in the more abstract cases, the more marginal cases where maybe some people didn't know, it was harder for people to get on board and actually sort of contradict them and try and like call out lots of these people. Because if you had a forum where like lots of people started trolling and abusing some poor individual, then the people who wanted to try and fight back against those people would have to give the people who were violently bullying someone on the point of suicide their names and addresses, right? This shut down all the sort of debate and fixed exactly the sort of problems that they want to deal with. So it was a radically unrealistic conception of how cyberbullying worked and probably something that made the worst situations a whole lot worse. Sixthly, they said, oh, why isn't moderation good enough? Like, here's an additional problem with the sort of problems about moderation, right? The only things they can actually stop on the internet are those that pass the level of criminal sanction, right? As I explained with sort of the drugs and child porn and that, like stuff earlier in this debate, we can capture all of those things too. The only things that they could possibly do anything to do were things that did not pass the level of criminal sanction, but were particularly distasteful comments or things that we might not want to see. At that point, they were being reactive too. So what they had to hang their hat on was some sort of like normative shift, right? People would be so scared to put bad views on the internet that it wouldn't happen. As I've explained earlier in my speech, I don't think that's going to happen. Last piece of writing before I get some more constructive material, free speech and repressive governments, right? It is not clear that all repressive governments can stop all people from saying all things they don't like in all instances, right? We think, for instance, the amount of stuff on Twitter is probably unpassable even to the Chinese government, right? For the sheer fact that there are like hundreds and hundreds of millions of these things, right? And it doesn't have to be on every single big issue. It might be people talking about the shitty circumstances that like internal migration laws or abortion laws in China. That sort of complex narrative and understanding of the day-to-day life connects people across a very large and like geographically large and like culturally diverse country and makes people more able to critique the government because they don't have to buy literally everything that is shoved down their throats, right? And the point is, you have to give that name any benefit. I'll take you in a second. Go. Sorry.
So obviously you don't need to monitor each and every comment. When you see a negative comment about your government policies, then you look it up, and that's why you're able to prosecute or otherwise harm those individuals.
Yeah, but like, okay, on both sides of the house, there's probably these elements to catch lots of these people, right? Your side of the house, no one's even willing to take the risk, right? At all. Any comment that could ever be published now comes with the knowledge that your name and address is given to the entire world, which is a bar that not many people are willing to jump over. Okay, last thing. As I said, what they had to hang their hat on was that people would be less likely to put out sort of like bad norms on the internet to begin with, right? We've already explained why that is less likely to happen because people who are intensely awful people will just do this anyway, right? Here's the reason why it's good that they do this though. We think that the sexism on the internet is external to sort of the internet as a forum in its